so welcome again to Community Science's webinar entitled Moving the Needle, Making Your Community Development Data Work for You. My name is Michael Shields, and I'm going to be facilitating today's webinar and taking you through a process that we use in our equitable community development practice area for doing data analyses and assessments for community economic development projects that we have found has allowed us to be more grounded, forward-thinking, inclusive, and build out sort of more concrete insights and doable strategies with our partners. So I'm going to walk you through that process today. Again, for those just joining, if you have any questions that pop up during the webinar, feel free to throw them into the Q&A feature of Zoom, and we will collect and go over them at the end. So today's takeaways, really, I'm hoping you walk away today recognizing the impact of local context and expertise, both in doing data analyses and assessments in community economic development, but just overall, how powerful adding local context and accounting for local context can be, and how powerful consulting with the community and finding community expertise can be. You'll also learn about our four-step process for doing our data-driven analyses and assessments for economic and community development assessments. I'm hoping you'll learn all about it, and then, I'm not expecting you to follow it or to apply it, step by step in your own analyses or in your own projects. But, I do hope you walk away identifying ways you can make your analytical assessment work more grounded, inclusive, and feasible, taking some of our best practices. Before I get too deep into it, I want to talk about community science and the equitable community development practice area. So community science is a research consulting firm offering a variety of services of research, strategy development, capacity building, evaluation, and we have a variety of practice areas as well, where our staff who have a slew of subject matter expertise in areas such as health equity, organizational effectiveness, education. The equitable community development practice area is just one of those, but community science, it's synonymous with the name. We do scientific rigor and analysis to help the community, to work with the community and for the community. And in our equitable community development practice area, we're working to promote opportunity and systems change for those living in place or seeking economic security. And our focus is on the systemic inequities that have historically and are currently extracting wealth and opportunity from marginalized individuals due to various demographic characteristics that are often discriminated against, as well as socioeconomic status and geographic location. So that's us in a nutshell. All right. Starting off, I think one thing that we can all agree about with economic and community development is that change is the only guarantee here. Change is the constant. And to highlight that, I pulled a series of headlines from various periodicals out there, kind of commenting on the varying changes going on across economic and community development spheres right now. My favorite being the last one there, navigating the bananas housing market of 2024. This is all me saying that there are large macro changes that we'll read about all the time, and the things we're experiencing, today and this year are going to be completely different from the things we're experiencing 5 years down the road. We'll be having different conversations then, but I think we can all agree that change is the only guarantee here. And that's what we're looking to measure at some point, because those community economic and housing changes are going to manifest in many different ways because of local context. So I've listed here, sort of 3 main ways that we see these sort of macro level changes occur in place. And that's changes in the built environment, changes demographically, and changes politically and legally. And one of the big things, is that I want to talk about is that these are going to be different depending on the local context or the local places or what are the rules and the norms and the communities in these places going on at a certain time. So, if there is a demand for more housing, that's sort of the macro change that's occurring right now. One community in their built environment may just build, 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 build. You may just see new development going on. Everyone's sort of building, building, building. Whereas another community seeing the same issue goes, no, we're fine. We want to kind of keep what we have. We want to maintain the community we have, maintain the buildings and infrastructure that we have. So you might see their decision as aging buildings or aging infrastructure in place. This is what I mean about like, it doesn't matter what the macro change is, it has to go through the filter of the local policies, context, rules, community norms, and ways of living that are going to make it manifest differently. So some of these changes that we see in the built environment, besides the two I just mentioned, we also see changing natural landscape with extreme weather events happening as a result of climate change. Areas that were once, unlivable may have now become more livable, and areas that once very livable may have now, we may have tapped the aquifer of this area and now people can't live here anymore. Or looking at Western North Carolina right now, areas that were, once hills may have completely been damaged, and the infrastructure has changed as a result of heavy rains and flooding of rivers and streams. So these are sort of changing natural landscapes affecting the built environment, right? Changing common spaces. I often joke with people like in the 60s, one a major common space for white middle class people was bowling alleys. And today that would be pickleball. The common spaces are those spaces where people come together to meet with community and kind of partake in community. It could be parks, libraries, cafes, but these common spaces are always changing. And now there's an argument too that they've become more virtual in nature. Changes demographically, new residents could be coming in. We see that often, taking advantage of economic opportunity or housing development. There could be displacement going on of residents who can't afford to live there leaving. There could be a complete out migration. There's just no economic activity here anymore, no reason to live in a certain place. So just the town just empties out. There's towns, many rural and small towns who are just aging in place. The kids have left for more economic opportunities in urban areas. So it's just the parents and grandparents kind of aging in place in a certain area. Politically and legal changes, there's new policies and rules out there. There'll be a new rule around zoning or a way that we do development that sort of changes how we interact in space and kind of manifests differently for different places. A new political leader or community movement out there, I have this agenda and this is what we're going to do going forward with this. New activities causing new rules to be put in place. I go back to the pickleball example. We've seen the rise in a lot of new rules around noise ordinances near pickleball courts because it's loud for some residents. So those are the political and legal changes. But the local context is always going to be the filter that shows how these macro changes hit the ground, what they look like on the ground. To further illustrate that point, I want to show you a few examples. So this is an intersection in the south end of Boston, the South Washington area of south end of Boston in 2007. But because of Boston's sort of demand of education and economic opportunity and all the things going on around there, the demand of housing that's associated with all that, the booming economy that Boston has had in more recent years, this is what it looks like today. It's become, an area that used to be sort of just parking lots and warehouses has now become a full neighborhood out of nowhere, full of condos and restaurants and small grocery stores and things of that nature, sort of built for the high demand of the higher income populations that are really trying to fight to get into Boston. Similarly, in Marietta, Georgia, a more suburban sort of setting here in 2012, right outside of Atlanta, the demand of people moving to the Sun Belt, these macro changes, how they manifest. If you look across the street there beyond the stop sign, what was once a parcel of one or two houses by now has been completely subdivided. So what was an area of one or two families is now an area of 60 families, and the infrastructure has changed and the utilities have changed and there's sidewalks now, and that's going to change the business dynamics. So these are all sort of the way that macro changes manifest on the ground. And it's not just new development. If we look at this more rural area in Roswell, New Mexico, it's not just housing being built, but it's sort of changes in policy and changes in rules and ways that we operate. The new demand for more renewable energy out there turn this what was probably an old ranch into a solar farm now. And that's going to change the way that people interact with that space or deal with that space now. It could offer economic incentives for the local area. And I hear it all the time too of like, well, that's these certain areas, but some small towns just never change. They're always the same. They've been that way for 100 years. But you can even kind of see how major shifts cause small changes in places as well. So this is St. Paul, Nebraska in 2012. If you look at the lamppost, the light post there, you'll see that, from 2012 to 2024, we've updated the technology. We've updated the way that we surveil people and the lighting and the things that we do in these spaces to make it more friendly and safe for businesses and shoppers and to make sure things are where we want them to be, or have some ordinances around how we're acting in these spaces. So these large sort of technological shifts kind of manifest on a small level and change how we interact in space, even in these small towns that we think are unchangeable. So if change is the name of the game, it is possible to measure and plan around these changes. I don't, there's hope. So we can always measure and strategize around community and economic development changes. Whole industries are built around this. Um, and there are many, there's a slew of data resources out there to help inform decision making and strategy, whether it's the Census Bureau's American Community Survey, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and all sort of the economic elements it has and indicators that it has. Many local and state governments have done a great job of building open data portals and kind of sharing their administrative data in a public-facing fashion, building permits, zoning ordinances, 311 data. There's a slew of resources out there. But the key emphasis here, and the point I'm trying to make from the key takeaways, is that the simple ungrounded, input to output of data, just sort of run the numbers and come up with an idea or a strategy, often can lead to uninformed insights and reactive strategy rather than sort of proactive or adaptable strategy. And we get it all the time here at Community Science. We often engage with folks of like, we tried this community solution here, or we ran the data and we came up with this new policy and it's just not working the way we thought it would work, or we're getting a lot of pushback from the community on this. And we always kind of ask the question, well, how did you engage the community about it? Or how'd you test it out? Or how'd you kind of come up with it? And more often than not, there's sort of this question of, well, we didn't, we didn't do it. So that's where I say, you want to make sure you're grounding your data and analyses and assessments and questions, with local context and local expertise. So when doing these analyses and assessments, these data-driven now for economic and community development, there's a few challenges that we kind of see a lot with our partners and those kind of starting on their own. These are the common things that we built a process to kind of overcome these challenges. So the common challenges, I liken them towards measurement challenges and strategy challenges. Those measurement challenges being more often than not all about data. So, we're not sure where to find the data that would be most meaningful for the thing I'm thinking about or the topic I'm interested in. Or on the opposite end of the spectrum, I need very specific or localized data around who's eligible for a program or how many people can take advantage of XYZ. Some people are unaware of the scale or impact of a change. I give the example of remote work here. We've had folks come to us of like, we just want to build a plan around, remote working and attracting remote workers. And, I often have to kind of break the news of like, that's only 10% of the population right now, of the full-time working population right now is fully remote, and it's shrinking every day. So that's, some people aren't thinking necessarily the full impact of a change or a scale of something or the data that's available. Um, or they just don't know how to measure it. That some of the intangible changes out there of, hey, we enacted a policy and we would love to see how that policy, is causing shifts in businesses or development or housing. So how do I do that? How do I measure that? Strategy challenges, kind of very similar, but in a different way of, some people are just unsure of where to begin. I don't know what my question is exactly, or I'm not sure. I think there's an issue here, but I'm not sure. They want to involve the community, but they don't know how or if they should or the best way to do it. We've had folks kind of focusing in on one topic or issue and kind of failing to see the compounding, elements to that issue. Back to the remote work example, I want to see more remote workers. I want to build, if I just build more houses and co-working spaces, that should attract remote workers, right? And we often have to say, okay, well, what's your school system look like? What other elements do you have? What other assets do you have in your community? Instead of these people do more than just, go home and work, basically. So they're not thinking of the compounding elements there. Um, we have folks come to us kind of cherry picking solutions of, I need data to show that we need more parking, and that's sort of the solution. And it's not that they're wrong, with these solutions that they have. It's just more of you have to have the conversation of like, well, what if you find contrary, evidence that is contrary to that you don't need more parking, or that, there's better solutions out there. What happens? Are you ready to deal with that? And then also two biases towards the needs or demands of one group or one, we've had people come of, I just need to, know how many people are eligible. I'm looking to build an, elderly repair, homeowner repair program for the elderly in my community. And, we kind of punched the numbers, and one time it was like, roughly 10% of the whole population would be eligible for it, whereas like 70% of the population was this low income renting population. It's like, are you going to get the best bang for your buck for a program like this, or should we kind of, think about other strategies or other solutions out there? Um, so we need to kind of think of ways of checking our biases. So here is our approach to doing our assessments and analyses that we use in our equitable community development practice area. It's a four-step cyclical approach. We start with the stories and goals. We calculate the trends. We then ground truth with experts, and then we prioritize what can be done with our partners. I'll go through these steps, one at a time in the rest of this webinar here. But really, overall, we have found that, this method allows us to kind of overcome those hurdles and biases that can be seen in those measurement and strategy challenges. It allows us to pair strategic measurement and insights with community engagement, a key element here of adding the local context and talking to the community and getting community input. It gives us a more holistic view of what's going on, of seeing how that change is happening in a local space or in a local place. And it helps us identify with our partners the appropriate and approachable interventions, the doable, feasible ones, not the, pie in the sky. If everything happens, this will be great and I'm done and I don't have to do anything anymore. The more of this is what I have control over and can do now. And this is what I have control over and can do in the next 6 months. So, thinking of that as the process here. So jumping right into it, step one, we start with the stories. So the story can be found in that initial reason for the engagement. So whether it's you doing this assessment or analysis yourself, or you're partnering with someone who needs an assessment or analysis, it's what's the underlying reason? Why do you want to go find data, basically? What's your research question here is how, we think about this academically. And more often than not, we get sort of like, we need more housing, we need more jobs. I want to know who's eligible for this program I'm thinking of, or people keep coming here and there's not enough housing, or people keep coming here, but we want to make sure that we're not displacing people. That's usually the stories that we hear. You get these stories from your local contacts, who's the primary contact who's kind of doing the engagement, or you're kind of consulting periodicals or looking at community boards. The outward facing piece, you want to do a little bit of background research here and kind of scanning of what's going on, and comparing similar places and applying similar contexts of, oh, okay, they said that they want more housing. I know a similar town, B, that has said the same thing, and here's what they were dealing with. You kind of use your knowledge and expertise and see what's going on. We also probe for the stories from our partner. We often find that while there's this sort of overarching story, we need more housing is sort of the story up front. There's usually some underlying elements to that story as well, or some underlying stories. So we often probe our primary context to kind of facilitate some discussion around the story of, what do you want your place to look like a year from now? What about 5 years from now? What about 10 years from now? This lets them kind of list out some of the measures of success that they're thinking about. And those measures of success can kind of lead you to new metrics of maybe this isn't just about housing. Maybe there's something else going on here. Or maybe this isn't just about more jobs. Maybe there's something else going on here. And then we also ask, like, what are the assets of your place that make it unique? People like to talk about their communities, and they'll identify what the strengths and weaknesses are. And you want to kind of see what those are and what do they want to grow. And that will also kind of tell you, like, if we want to grow certain strengths, what strengths, do we want to see going forward? So throughout this, I'm going to talk about an example engagement. I'm going to call them Small City USA. I'll kind of take you through each of the steps and kind of give you sort of this example engagement in real time of how we went through this full process with them. So this small city was contacted us, and they basically came to us saying, we want more market rate housing. That's our story. That's what we think we need. So we sat down, we had a kickoff meeting with them. We had a full discussion about it. And not only did they say they needed market rate housing, but they showed interest in attracting new residents, attracting new employers, and building a stronger tax base. So we kind of asked around a little bit and did some research on our own of what was going on. And we found that this city really had a historic stigma of poverty, crime, and homelessness in their state. They were kind of looked down upon by other municipalities, really, that were like, oh, that's the poor city. Oh, that's the place people go who are poor, or that's where homeless people go. So really what we found was that while this overarching story of we need more sort of middle income housing, market rate housing, it was getting kind of placed as like the cure-all for some desired revitalization, almost like a silver bullet of if we build it, revitalization will happen. So there, our initial focus shifted from just sort of an assessment of market rate housing to an assessment of market rate housing, as well as an assessment of, well, what are the current housing needs of the population that's currently there and the population that will be there in the next couple 10 years going forward, growing in place? And what are some economic development metrics out there so we can kind of look a little bit further about some other sort of strategies and solutions? So from starting with the stories, we go to step two, which is calculate the trends. This is the typical quantitative analysis that everyone associates with a community assessment or an economic development analysis. You're either grabbing secondary data out there from the ones we talked about, the census, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or you're collecting your own primary. You've constructed a survey and you're putting it out to the community. It's very doable. It's just more time intensive and expensive. But either way, you're looking to collect information and start calculating trends, right? How we do this and how we've had success with this is we start with some key foundational metrics out there. So there's some metrics that we pull across projects, no matter what the stories are for these projects, and that's sort of population characteristics, population growth, what's it look like? Is it growing? Is it declining? What's the demographics look like? Age kind of groups, going on here. Housing information. What's the housing stock? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Median sale price going on? Types of homes, things of that nature. And then some basic economic trends, median household income, poverty rate, unemployment rate. Kind of, we'll look at like what's going on at a very sort of 5,000-foot view. But then, we identify metrics related specifically to the stories. And this kind of prevents that sort of drowning in data problem that most people kind of run into as a measurement challenge of, oh, there's just so much out there, I can pull so many things. Well, this kind of like keeps you on task and lets you prioritize what needs to be known. So, you might be someone might be asking we want to build a program around home repair. Okay, well then you're going to pull some metrics related to the building stock and the age of the building stock and, has it been repaired or does it need repair? Someone might be thinking of an economic development strategy. That's the story. We need more employment. So you're looking at business growth as a metric that you would pull. See, hey, is business growing at all? And if it is growing, what industries is it growing? Where are there employment opportunities? For one of the examples that I showed, you might be pulling measurements of crime because, oh, there was a perception of crime with this place. Okay, well, let's actually see that. Is there actual crime going on that's different from other areas? And then from there, you visualize the trends. So I'll show you some examples of visualizations that we've done in the past with some of our partners, kind of showing off these foundational and story metrics. So we were working with a small borough in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, Lansdale, Pennsylvania. Kind of these are some foundational metrics for just looking at population change over a 10-year period and built out sort of a map for the town across their neighborhoods using census tracts from the American Community Survey and just looking at, hey, where has there been population growth and decline? And most often, there was growth basically across every neighborhood except one, that orange neighborhood there, which saw just a small amount of decline in that 10-year period. Same thing, Lansdale, part of these foundational metrics that we pulled. We were looking at median household income when controlling for inflation. Basically saying like, if, all right, the population's growing, what kind of is it an economically wealthy population growth? Like what's going on in terms of median household income? And more often than not, these populations had higher incomes coming in, and that's what we found. We were working with the city of Westwego, just south of New Orleans, looking at one of the story metrics that came up. We heard, oh, we have an aging population, and we're looking at, they had a housing question, but they were talking about their aging population. And so we looked at that, like, let's see what the aging population looks like in comparison with the state of Louisiana. So we looked at the proportion of those above the age of 55, which isn't aging. I don't want to say that if you're over 55, you're aging. We were just looking at a number, just seeing, because we were looking at a population projection for the next 10 years. And we found that, yes, your population is going to be proportionally aging faster than that of the whole state of Louisiana when you kind of expand the projection out in the next 10 years. We were working with the city of Rutland, Vermont. They were interested in a housing question as well. So we just calculated their median sale prices. This was one of the story metrics that we pulled for them. They were interested in some of their housing pieces. And what we told them actually, which they were excited about, was that, in an age where housing has become, very expensive and less affordable for many populations, you, in comparison with the county and the state that you're in, you have a more affordable housing market than most, which was something that excited them. Working with the Philadelphia, we pulled some historic census, the decennial census data from 1950 all the way to 2020, and we were looking at sort of the phenomenon and process of white flight in the mid 20th century when white middle income populations were incentivized to go live in suburbia or to buy suburban homes, whereas other populations weren't. And sort of what does that mean for the current breakdown of Philadelphia's neighborhoods right now, and sort of seeing that change in real time from 1950 to 2020 of the percent of white residents living in certain neighborhoods. Also, another project in Philadelphia, we were looking at the impact of the pandemic on new construction trends. So we pulled new construction building permits and built out a heat map just to show prior to the pandemic and during the pandemic, just seeing where new construction activity was being, strongest and weakest in certain neighborhoods, and seeing the change over time. So that's sort of visualizing the trends and some of the work that we've done in the past, whether it's the foundational metrics or the story metrics. Some considerations when thinking about calculating trends. Not every story or goal is going to have some readily available data. This is often a conversation I have with folks all the time. There is not a magic data tree out there that just has every data question you might have or has your data just waiting for you to be picked. In fact, many, many times the data just don't exist, and you either have to find a proxy metric like we did with building permits. So that was a great proxy metric for new construction activity, because while it didn't physically show new construction, it showed where people were thinking about doing new construction via a building permit they pulled and applied for with the city. But many times the data just aren't there unless you're going to collect it yourself. A good example of this was during the pandemic. We had constant requests for metrics around minority and women-owned businesses in the wake of the financial resources that were being made available for relief during the pandemic. And I just had to tell people, like, there just isn't good data out there at the level that they were looking for of Black-owned businesses or women-owned businesses or Hispanic-owned businesses. It's just the census had county level metrics from 2017 that only showed businesses with employees. So it just wasn't a full picture, and people, we need this data. And I was like, well, unless you're going to start collecting it, you definitely, a lot of other people need it too. It was just one of those things that just at the time wasn't available. And I think others have started collecting it as of recently, but at the time it was needed and wasn't there. It's always better to plan out a prioritization of metrics before starting an analysis. This prevents that issue of drowning in data. And you saw us do that with the foundational metrics and sort of the story metrics. But even within that, you want to make sure that you're kind of like identifying what are the key story metrics that we need here. You don't just want to kind of grab everything and anything, because as my third point shows, data verification, cleaning, and visualizing take a long time. I talk with my analysts about this all the time. Like, it might take a day just to get a bar graph sometimes, because you're busy cleaning data and making it, verifying it, making sure it's right, making sure it's correct, and then you're cleaning it and you're kind of putting it into the groups it needs to be put into. So it's always important to prioritize the data in a way that's feasible, but also kind of building in check-in points and progress points if you're working with a partner, especially. Before you go deep into cleaning, hours and hours of cleaning of data, and you build a great visualization or a bar graph or whatever, and you show it to the client, and client's just like, yeah, that doesn't really mean much to me, or I didn't really need that. And it's like, oh, so you want to make sure that you're kind of like offering sort of preliminary findings along the way to make sure that, it's easy to do some redirections and you can kind of stay on time and within budget. From calculating the trends, we go to the third step, which is ground truthing with experts. So this is where you get the local context. And I say expertise comes in many forms. So this is not of, oh, I need to learn about, all the housing. I need to talk to every, PhD that studies housing. That's not what I mean when I'm talking about experts or expertise. Expertise comes in many forms, and we find that experts are those who are most knowledgeable about the identified issues or trends are those who will be the most impacted by them. So if it's a question of like housing needs, you might talk to housing professionals, local government leaders, and local residents. No one's going to know more about the local housing needs than the residents who actually live there, who have a house or are looking for a home or looking to rent. Those are the experts on the ground. This is that opportunity to really add that local context to the trends you're finding. The quantitative analysis you might be doing when you calculate the trends is really going to keep you at a high level, really high up. This is the opportunity to kind of say, okay, this is what I found. Is this panning out on the ground? Is this what's actually happening on the ground? So you work to what we call member validation. You work to see if it's actually working on the ground with local experts who know about that topic or who may be impacted by that topic. It also allows you to identify the key factors happening now, the contextual things that are happening now, as well as what will happen in the near future, right? Most of the administrative data out there is already delayed. The American Community Survey is a great example, a great, powerful data set. But the 2023 data just came out 2 days ago in December 12th. So those estimates are already dated. They're already a year, going to be 2 years behind. So it's great that you can kind of show what's been happening in the quantitative data and then actually see what's happening on the ground or verify what's happening on the ground, because you might learn that actually, yeah, there was business growth, but in January there's going to be a new business tax coming in, and that might change things. Or yeah, employment has been growing, or employment has been declining. And actually, just last month, our largest employer in town has decided to shut down and leave, or is going bankrupt, or is growing. That's going to affect that employment going forward here, and that's going to make you think of those strategies. And you would never really get that from the quantitative data. You'd only really get that from ground truthing that quantitative data with local expertise. So I go back to our small city USA example engagement here. So we went through, did our analysis. We found that the data showed that market rate housing would largely exceed most of the current residents' financial means. They wouldn't have been able to afford it, the ones who were currently living there. So the city wanted to put in some market rate housing, or was thinking about the need for more market rate housing. But the reality is it wouldn't fit the financial needs of the individuals living there. So we asked about housing trends, market rate housing trends, and affordable housing trends with government officials, with local housing professionals, with some community investor developers, some homegrown community investor developers, as well as local renters and residents. Like, we were asking them directly of, what has been your experience finding housing here? What would be the impact of more mixed income housing, more market rate housing? And what we learned is that the city had been very successful at deploying affordable housing resources and financing and getting sort of projects done and getting revitalization renovations done, I should say, for more affordable housing units with these local investor developers. But the city still had this associated stigma from other communities about being an area of poverty. And one of the weird metrics we found when we calculated the trends was that the unhoused or the homeless population of this small city had grown exponentially, like from 50 individuals to almost 300 something individuals in the span of 2 years. And we were like, what is going on here? And we learned the story that during the pandemic, one of the local hotels was able to house most of the state's unhoused and homeless populations, kind of taking advantage of a policy that was in place. And they were still living there at that point in those hotels at the time that we were doing the analysis. So we were able to kind of ground truth a weird metric that was going on, and also think about, this is going to be a barrier towards that stigma you're trying to change about homelessness, since more of the state's homeless population have come in here and is living on the outskirts of your town in hotels. Some considerations when ground truthing with experts. Not all quantitative trends are going to pan out on the ground. Some things are just going to be weird and quirky, and there's not going to be really a direct answer for them. It's okay. You're not, here to get all the answers or expect all the answers here. You just kind of flag it, and maybe the answer will reveal itself over time, but sometimes it might just not be part of the story, or it might have to kind of be shuffled aside until it reveals itself. That administrative data that you might be using, or even survey data, it's going to miss those developing or potential trends that only those on the ground could see. And I think I've emphasized that point enough, of that, really, you got to ground truth with the experts to get the holistic picture of what's actually going on, both at a 5,000 foot level and at a 5 foot level. it's important to identify the most impacted as experts, right? It seems very difficult to make decisions around, for the community without ever consulting the community. It happens all the time, but it is very nonsensical. And when people kind of shrug their shoulders of, well, why didn't this work? Or why am I getting such pushback? Well, you didn't really ask them. You asked the people you were impacting the most with this decision. Maybe if you had thought about it, asked them, build a community advisory group, tested some of your solutions before you just implemented them, that would kind of lead to a more successful strategies. We always find it's good too when working with a partner to check your ground truthing strategy and questions with your primary context. Even if you're doing this alone, it's always good to have another set of eyes on some of your questions that you might use to ground truth your trends. This avoids misinterpretations. You don't want to be using sort of triggering language. Affordable housing might be a triggering language that kind of sets people into, a mindset that's different than you want them to be in. So you might need to, use a different phrasing. You're checking your own biases at that point too. You want to make sure that the questions make sense, not just to you, but to the people you're actually going to be speaking with. And a big one that people often forget is it avoids the inequitable promises too when you kind of check your work and check your questionings. The last thing you want to do is like talk to the community of, hey, your government wants to do more market rate housing. What do you think about that? Because you're kind of setting up a promise of two things can happen. One, they go, oh, great, we need that. Awesome. And then you kind of finish the project and the government kind of finds out of like, there's not really money here. We can't really do it. Okay, well, you just made a promise to the community that it's happening and now it's not happening. Or the other side of it is, hey, your government wants to do more market rate housing here. And the community comes, well, that's not what we need. Like, what are they talking about? We need more investment in schools. This is crazy. So you want to make sure that you're phrasing your questions and your ground truthing more to the point of questions that are more neutral in the sense of, what do what type of housing do you think is needed in this area? What would be the impact of more market rate residents moving in? What do you think, that would be sort of ways of sort of checking that and making sure that it makes sense for the people you're contacting with. Okay, we move to the fourth step, prioritize what can be done. And this is kind of a two-part step where you're kind of synthesizing what you've learned. We call this a triangulation of data because you're taking the story and you're taking the quantitative data you pulled and you're taking the qualitative data you pulled and you're kind of synthesizing them into sort of findings. And you're identifying what are the prevailing findings? What are the things that smack you in the face and say, this is pertinent to this engagement, or this relates directly to the story that was asked. This policy is going to negatively impact housing development. I learned that from ground truthing, or I ran the numbers and there's just increasing unaffordability here, and that's going to be a problem going forward. And what we do is we end up listing the biggest opportunities and the biggest barriers to that story or that goal that has been outlined since the beginning, right? So we kind of say okay, if you want market rate housing, here are all the opportunities in play right now that will get you that, to the point where you can think about doing market rate housing. And here are the future opportunities that would benefit you if they happen, that would help you there. And here are the barriers in place right now that you're going to have to overcome to think about market rate housing. And here are the future potential barriers that you're going to have to think about and overcome to get to where you want to be. The second part about this is like we strategize solutions after we've kind of labeled out what are the outcomes and what are the barriers. We work directly with our contacts on this one. This is not us kind of like in a back room somewhere and you need to do X, Y, and Z and you'll be successful. No, this is us kind of like facilitating conversations around what solutions are plausible. So we look for what we call the levers of change. Those are the pieces of change that you have the most control over or what you have the greatest impact over. What we don't want to hear is like, well, if this state decides to enact this policy and then this developer decides this, then I can do this. Okay, well, that means you have very limited control over that sort of change or piece because two big things have to happen first. So you have to kind of take a step back and say, what do you actually have control over? Where actually can you kind of apply your agency? So you might not be able to attract a developer or get a developer to build this huge housing complex that you want. But what you do have control over is you can create a new financial incentive program or some policy that's favorable for development to further attract that developer. That's what you have control over. Or you might want to make sure that your policies or the growth that you've been experiencing is not, you want to stop displacement. Okay, well, maybe you need to form a community advisory group around what's going on and where displacement is occurring in real time so that you are more sort of keyed and in tone with what's going on and where displacement is happening, where gentrification might be happening, and that might be a way for you. That's something you have more control over. We often kind of also ask that our challenge our partners to build more reverse timelines. And what we mean by that is like rather than I can do X, Y, and Z, and I want to make sure that I do 1, 2, and 3. What we say is like, what can you do in the next year? What can you do in the next 6 months? What can you do in the next month? What can you do tomorrow? And kind of that helps you sort of outline of like, what do I have control over? What is more plausible to do right now? What is more plausible to do in the future? And we want these strategies to be proactive rather than reactive. To the point I made before, like this is not about waiting for a certain policy at the state level to go through or for a community to move in or for a developer to show up one day and decide to move. It's about building an adaptability of, I'm going to build this incentive program to attract development or to, incentivize building. And if that doesn't work, I can do this. Or if it does work and we get too many developers competing and the risk, I can do this. And it's sort of building an adaptability around your your strategized solutions. So I go back to the example. We prioritize what can be done with our small city USA. We listed out the barriers and opportunities to market rate housing development. We showed them, the many barriers when you're just simply focusing on market rate housing in that place. And we showed them the barriers related to their limited control and agency. And we showed the opportunities of some mixed income development and some of the work that they were doing around affordable housing and the opportunity to partner and do some market rate housing with their affordable housing to see if some people would bite and to see if there was actually sort of a market there. And we showed opportunities around economic development and destigmatizing the city's brand, and showed them, hey, your city officials are connected to the community. They have great institutional knowledge. They help build those sort of in-community investor developers. And like that was success. That was an opportunity that could be grown out and sort of brought forward as a solution or a strategy. And that's exactly what we said to them. We said your levers of change here are your resource curation, your relationship building, and your destigmatizing. So resource curation, your city officials had such institutional knowledge and such contact with the community that they helped build those community investor developers that like instead of just like waiting for a developer to show up to ask, why not curate all your financial and building resources on your website and just make it easy for people to see, hey, here's all the ways that you can be an investor developer too and help build housing in your neighborhood. We told them to continue to build those relationships within the community and also think about sort of others outside the community as well. Any nearby local developers who are doing some major projects in other towns, as well as some state and community actors, since there were some development policies in place that were a little unfavorable for the work they were trying to do. And we said, you need to build those contacts. You need to have kind of build some coalitions for what the community needs and wants. And then we told them to continue to work against their stigma narrative that they had sort of historically gained by hosting more regional events and getting people to come visit. They were doing like farmers markets. We said amplify that, do some regional events going on, some holiday events. They had a great artistic community there that was doing murals on the downtown buildings. And we said, why not do some painting and murals on the road that people are going by when they see the town, move it so that, you kind of change the brand a little bit and you're using some community power and empowerment to basically like, take pride in their place. So some final considerations here for this process that I presented today. It's cyclical. You saw that it was in a circle. Yes, you can kind of strategize solutions and arguably you're done. That is your off ramp. But more often than not, when you're calculating the trends and when you're ground truthing with people in the community, more questions are going to pop up, more stories are going to pop up that you're going to need to kind of go back and go through the process one more time of calculate those trends and ground truth those realities. And it can lead to new stories and new questions. I argue that like perfect saturation is reached when everyone's in agreement. We prioritized and consented in the sense of you could spend a lifetime going through every research question, every reality, every piece. But I think as long as you have sort of I got what I needed. I prioritized what I needed for the question that I originally had. There's some additional questions that I might be able to answer in the future, or I can quickly answer right now. As long as the community and everyone you're working with is kind of in consent of like, this is what we needed. I don't think we need any more right now. That's usually the cutoff point. I mean, the big determinant of that is timing and budget. So that's always one big piece. Finally, we need to check our own biases and interests as well. We as researchers often come in with the biases. Sometimes you just, oh, here's a really interesting finding that you know so much about, but it might not be necessary for the story, or it might not be sort of part of this story at all, or just yet. Your job is to translate the findings and information for the intended audience. This is about speaking their language, not your language. This is not a dissertation or an academic paper. This is about working to with the community to keep it short, sweet, and to the point. If you want to go deep into methodologies and sort of the backgrounds of things and the deep, literature reviews of things that are required, that's what appendices are for in these reports. Um, and also a big thing too is we compensate community members for their expertise. So, when it's not their job, they're not a housing professional or kind of doing sort of invest in developing or pieces like that. They're a resident, they're a renter, and we kind of ask them, and they've been sort of working with us in some way and to offer insight. We do provide compensation, whether that's financial compensation or sort of a building, some of our projects, we have sort of capacity building elements for a lot of our community-based organizations and sort of help around analysis and data pieces and grant writing and things of that nature. So it's something that we encourage all the time. You should compensate. It was not part of their job to provide expertise. They just gave up free time to you to offer you and your job. So we argue that compensation is you usually due. So something to think about. Okay, I think that is all that whole process I have today. But we would love to hear from all of you. I'm going to stop sharing real quick. Don Terrius, have you been able to pull some questions? There was a question on more specifics about data resources for the community. Any trusted links and appreciated. Our go-to is always the American Community Survey. There is a slew of research questions out there that are community-based, community-related. If you go to uscensusdata.com, basically, like it's all there. You can pull your town, your community. In fact, we're hopefully going to be running a tutorial on doing that in the future. Stay tuned for that because it's very easy. It's very accessible. It's very easy to grab those data. Again, to the Bureau of Labor Statistics or the FRED, the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank makes these data, kind of takes data from the census and data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and visualizes it for you right away if you're looking for specifics. But yeah, it depends on the question. But more often than not, we go to the American Community Survey. That's usually the first stop for any of those questions. Where can I go and find and hire a data analyst to help with my community project? Local universities, local, other than that, I'm not sure. It depends on what resources are in your area. Again, we work to try and help train people internally. I'm a big advocate of trying to train from within the communities that you're working with. No one's going to know the instances and data better. So like if you have someone who knows data, if you have a city official who knows data and is working with data really well, it's always good to kind of start like mentoring programs or apprenticeship programs in that way. But yeah. What impact measurement performance reporting in the case studies you use to monitor, evaluate more important report on progress? I'm not sure of that question, Carlos. Could you clarify that one, Carlos Delgado? Someone asked about favorite resources used for attaining localized data. Yes. So again, the ACS is always my favorite because yes, it's behind, but it is kind of very telling and very powerful, especially when you get deep, deep, deep into some of their questions. Some of their questions are like very, very detailed and can help you along the way. But I also, in sort of housing stuff, Redfin, the real estate company Redfin, this is not a promotion of them, but they offer a free data portal where you can pull data for local towns about median sale prices, number of listed prices or homes out there, residential real estate, things of that nature. Zillow does it too. Zillow had a great sort of renting information as well. So that's like they're like only a month behind, so they're probably like putting out data now from either October or November of 2024. So that's always an interesting resource. Uh, Talk a bit about getting community consensus approach, best practices. Very much, Vivian, very much. Easier said than done. Really, more often than not, it's sort of finding your trusted community leaders. That's always a good sort of avenue. Those that, if you're working with a government official or working with the government, they'll sort of have those community people who are like anchors or leaders in their community that they can kind of rely on for relaying the message and getting community consensus or getting at least the message out to the community. Other ways of doing it is you got to identify those groups on your own, right? When looking for sort of community grounded expertise, um, we often kind of like identify who are the main sort of community groups in the area, the movers and shakers that we know, and try and work with them as best we can if they're willing to work with us. But yeah, I mean, like it is very difficult to get community consensus. These things are often contentious. There's always sort of like warring parties here, but there's often, more often than not, I found that people want the same thing. And it's sort of bringing back the similarities that they want. It's just sort of the strategies and solutions may be different, but at the end of the day, people want each other to be sort of thriving in their community, have some economic security and going forward. It's just a matter of like how it gets done and sort of the languages that we use, because sometimes we're often saying the same thing, just using different points or language around it. And it's just a matter of sort of code switching and kind of showing the community that no, we can speak your language. This is what we're hearing from you. And it's kind of taking that language back to those in power, really, at the end of the day, and saying, no, if you want this strategy to work, you have to consider it this way. And you have to look at this viewpoint. So it's often us kind of taking the community's kind of voice to the government official, but finding the community voice through the government official, if that makes sense. When you showed the metrics you were working towards, do you use dashboards or impact measurement systems to monitor, evaluate how the plans and businesses are performing? Carlos, I believe this is a follow-up for me asking your question. Um, this is just me. This is no one else. It's not community side. I hate dashboards. I think dashboards, often when they're made, I think they're out of date the minute they are made. And I think I could like wallpaper my office with how many dashboards are out there that are now just sitting there collecting dust. So I do not use dashboards. I go back to the data that I originally pulled and see and look for updates. Really, that's what it is. Because again, the context is going to change. So if you're pulling a certain metric of housing and you put in a new solution for that housing going forward, well, you're looking for that new solution that you put forward. And yes, some of the same metrics might be there, but you're looking for other metrics as well. And you're looking for the impact at a different way. So it's really about starting the process all over again and not, I don't want to say wasting your time with the dashboard, but more often than not, if it's a good dashboard updates itself and has metrics that are sort of universal in a way, those are just very hard to find. We're trying to understand our local nonprofit ecosystem to help inform data collection and quality expertise. Any recommendations on how to ensure equity and diversity? In that nonprofit ecosystem, it's the ones who are directly in the community and working with the community. That's sort of my simple answer to that. More often than not, it's sort of sometimes it's like a little bit of a data boot camp of like if you're running data and you want to kind of show what's going on, it's explaining the data and the analyses. I mean, more often than not, they know what they're talking about. They know what resources they need. They know what the data is saying. They know what's going on the ground. So it's really about finding those ones that are most connected to the community. And most working in the community with programs aimed at the community and showing sort of positive community outcomes. I mean, there's plenty of nonprofits out there that are doing stuff in housing that just like don't deal with the community and they're just only talking to government or they're only talking to business. And those are the ones that are going to be less connected. So like if you're really trying to look into your ecosystem about promoting equity and diversity for certain populations, you want to make sure that the organizations you're contacting are accurate representations of those populations and not necessarily the issues those populations are facing. Do you provide dashboards that get updated with data over time, or do you most of your partners prefer screenshots, cross-sectional data visualizations, and recommendations? It's the latter. Most of our partners provide the latter. We do a lot of reports, whether they're slide deck reports or full-on reports. But also we kind of like offer ourselves up for if you want to update, we'll come, work with you to update this information. But like I said, more often than not, you're not looking at the same metrics again, or if you are, you're adding metrics to it. So that's where I say like dashboards are hard because dashboards are often just sort of looking at a snapshot of time. And I think people like them because they're like flashy and can be great. And like, sure, some of them can be, but more often than not, people just don't use them. And this is coming from a data analyst. Is there a specific type of data map that will help us see racial, cultural groups and communities? It depends. Like I said, we do maps like that all the time around census tracts or census block groups for certain areas where we'll look at sort of what the makeup of the different racial or ethnic populations may be, or cultural groups or communities may be, depending on how they're kind of listed in the sense. Like I said, the ACS has a great questions beyond just sort of the simple sort of race, ethnicity questions around sort of cultural groups and communities. Yeah, there's a ton of resources out there, and there's a way to visualize it for sure. Any applications that you use to help create visualizations from your data collection efforts? So I use RStudio and the various packages that it offers. So the maps I showed you were leaflet maps, which is a package that is both outside R and inside R. That makes it easy, but it's basically like GIS, but you're just coding it rather than kind of manually clicking it through. Other visualizations. I mean, like, hey, Excel's really powerful. I mean, like, people, again, you don't need the shiny brand new things. Like, sometimes you just need a bar graph, and the bar graph is going to be the most telling thing. It's really, sometimes I think those population projections I did were line graphs were Excel. But Plotly's a great one too if you're looking for interactive visuals. They're free. Leaflet is free. R is free. How can we engage? Yes, you can engage with community science, of course. You can look us up on our website and find us and kind of email for inquiries and things of that nature. Well, thank you all. It's 2 o'clock. Hope this was helpful. And we're happy to engage for anyone who wants to engage.